everyone, welcome back. In our last two advanced episodes, we built an asset repository. So in the first episode, we built out the framework for the asset repository to hold all of the necessary elements by namespace or package. And then in the next episode, we built out or brought in our elements, our assets into the repository. So I'll leave the links below in the description, and you can step through that if you haven't already. In this episode, we're going to go to a separate Sparx instance, and we're going to build a script to access this intelligence and bring this into our new project. So let's get started. So I've already built a script for this demonstration, trying to make this less than 30 minutes long. This is a 6-hour course that I give to the companies I work with. And we've got a blank project for the most part. I've already brought in the building blocks. We'll talk about this in the episode, but I'm in the test area. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to access scripts. I'm in the default layout where browsers on the left, properties in the right, upper right, and notes is in the lower right. So I'm going to go to my common layout here in just a moment. So we're going to go to Specialized tab, all right? Go to the Specialized tab, and up here in Scripting, we see Script Library, and it pops up below the work area down here, and we've developed a script that we're going to run. It's simply called Test Connection. It can be called anything, and we're going to change the name in the end, and we can run the script here. But we programmed this script to work in the browser, so I can run it right from the package that it's in the test area, right? So when you build a script, Specialized pops up. It allows you to get to your script automation. And in here, scripts, and you can see it's named Test Connection. We're going to go ahead and run this, and a dialog box pops up that prompts the user to key in a reference number. And we're going to use object ID 60 in this case. We'll talk more about this. And you can see down here in the system output, it brought in an application called e-commerce site. So we're able to go into our model, drag and drop this in as a link, and it brings in everything from the database, a separate SQL instance where our asset repository is, containing all of the intelligence for this asset. So let me show you how we built this and the steps to follow, the practices that I follow in order to accomplish this. All right, first let me switch over to my common workspace layout. Here we go. And it puts the script window over in the lower right, all right? So this is where we're going to write our script. So the first thing that we want to do in browsers in the upper right now is we want to build out our namespaces or packages for this design and implementation. So we're going to start with building out the building blocks. This is where we're going to bring in the assets that we want to test and use for the development. And then we want to bring in the Sparx data tables. And I did a video on this, and I'll include the link below. So we're going to bring in all the Sparx data tables. We're only going to use one of them and then plan to use another. I'll talk about that in a moment. Then we're going to build out a namespace for the actual script design, and we'll get into that. And then, of course, we need a test area to test our accomplishments in the end. All right, so we're using XMI to import in our building blocks here, and we brought in the solution approach package from the project that we did for Arco. That's part of our model-driven anything series. And I wanted to bring in the building blocks, all right? So I wanted to bring in these assets in order to use a target, if you will, to represent our design. So essentially, I was just bringing in one item here. It's the e-com site. I went through elements here. I exposed the element data that I want to see. So we're showing the components. Let me cancel out. Here we're bringing in the operations, the attributes, and the tag values, which is going to be a separate episode. We're just going to focus on bringing in the data for this element, which is in the asset repository. So we have our example element that we're going to use. The next thing that we did was we imported in the Sparx tables, all right, all 99 of them. We're only going to use one of them for this episode, and that's the T-object table. So I simply brought them in. I went down and looked for T-object table, dragged and dropped it in here. And then I also brought in T-object properties, which holds the tag values. We'll demonstrate how to build out or extend the script in order to do that, but we're focused only on T-objects. The next thing we do is, let me bring this script window out here like this, is we create a script group. And you do that simply by going in while you're in the script window, you can come up here and create new groups, all right? And what we did was we created a browser group, all right? So let me bring this up again, a new project browser group. And when we did that, we gave it a name, UMLO scripts. Let's look at the group properties here. So we named it UMLO scripts. The group type is browser. You can certainly change them at any time if you clicked something wrong. And then it has its own global unique ID, and its source is the repository, the Sparx repository, right? So we created our group, and then inside this, we added a script. So what I'm going to do here, just to demonstrate what that looks like, we're going to build in this episode a VB script, all right? You can use JS script. I prefer JavaScript today. I started out on VB script. It's the easiest to learn unless you already know JavaScript, because a lot of us started in Visual Basic, and so we understand the premise of the language and how to build it out. So we're going to simply select new script, and then we're going to give it a name. I'm just going to go ahead and leave this because I'm going to delete it. And in here, you can see Sparx sets up the framework for you, all right? And what I do is I bring this in and then I strip it down to what I'm going to work with as we're moving forward. Let's go ahead and right click on this, and we're going to delete the script because we don't need it. And we're going to show you the script that we're going to build. What I want to talk about is, let me go back to my common layout to organize my windows. What I want to talk about is the development environment. Now, as you saw a moment ago, you can certainly use Sparx to develop and code your scripts, but I tend to work in my integrated development environment, my IDE, right? So what I'm going to do is essentially bring up my IDE. It is Visual Studio Code. I can use this. I can certainly use Eclipse. I can use Visual Studio, the full version, and other script building tools. But this gives me the ability to take advantage of smarter coding environment. I don't have IntelliSense configured, but when I select a particular element, it's basically going to help me understand where I'm coding in my code, and you'll see that in just a moment. So the very first step, as I stated a moment ago, is I clear out the Sparx content that they have, except for the option explicit here, which, this basically is a statement in VB script that forces you to explicitly declare all variables before using them, right? And it's optional. If you leave this out, the script is still going to work, but it's a practice. I leave that in because Sparx provided it. The next thing is the include statement here. And the include statement is basically going out to local scripts, and it's bringing in the constants, I almost said constraints, constants for VB script, all right? So when we go over to the platform and we're looking at VB scripts, let me bring it back out here again. You're going to see here's the namespace for local scripts. In here, if we expand this, is EA constants. So it's going out and it's grabbing the script to reuse within the script that we're building, and it has a bunch of things that you can go through on your own. The next point is very important to me. It's a best practice, and I see a lot of people developing scripts that don't include good comments describing it. So Sparx provided us kind of a basis we can build on. We're going to basically name this script either one of these. I'm probably going to use a camel type naming convention, something like that. The type, VB script, right? Anybody that understands VB script opens it will see that. The author, right? And the purpose of the script. And the purpose of this one is just to talk about step one, establish script framework. And then the date the script was created, not updated. You'll do your updates down here in a changelog, which I added, and the example framework did not have that in there. So this is the most important thing I believe that you need to do when you're starting. Now, the first step, I also bring in my DB connect string pattern here. We're using this driver. This is the provider for Microsoft SQL. All right, so we're using the native connection DLL, and here basically you're going to put in your server name, the port, database name, and ours is going to be asset repo. And then if you've got security turned on, your username and password, all right? And then I'm going to bring in my two functions, right? The first one, and we're going to name it test connections because this is a test during development. And we're going to end this script with the same name as the subroutine. And again, the function. This is optional, but it's just a practice that I do. And using the IDE, when I name my function, I basically can copy and paste it down here, and I can see that they equal. There's no typos. I'm bringing in a second function, and this is the code that we're going to use to execute the SQL statement in order to access the data that we want. So step one, this is what my script is going to look like. In step two, I start declaring our variables, all right? So in here, we're using the dim statement and Visual Basic, and we're declaring the variables that we're going to use. Now, how do we come up with these, right? This is where Sparx becomes powerful in design, and we're going to show you that next. So we're in our design namespace for the script, and keep your namespace, your package, the name of the script. You can always rename it, very easy, all right? So I bring in a class element, and then in this class element, I bring up features, and features allows us to, and let me just drag and drop this, and I'm just going to put it below the workspace here. So it allows me within my blank class element to start defining my attributes, right? Now, one of the most important things is before you get started, if I double click and open this, change the language to the language that you're building on. So it could be JavaScript, or it could be Visual Basic. And we're just going to use Visual Basic because that gives us the type, such as variant, and gives us some of the defaults when we're going through. It just makes it a lot faster for you. If you're in a language, it's going to use the data types for that specific language. So we have the name that we all added down in here, and we added an operation, one of the functions. I don't have both functions in here. It's just a design element. I'm not coding from this, all right? So let me go ahead and close this. We'll bring back our common layout in just a moment, right? So I want to simulate this. So the first thing I need to do is start with the requirements. Responsibilities is what we refer to that. So we basically already wrote them out, the scope and requirements that we want to do for this script. A lot of times you're reusing this as you're building scripts, all right? So I can reuse this framework if I want when I'm doing this, all right? And they're internal to the particular element. The next thing I did in it, I'm showing you in advance, is I wanted to build out a scenario to step through how the code is going to work. And there's previous video on this as well. So you learn how to do all of this in this channel. That's why it took so long to get to this particular episode as we're going forward. And we'll go back to this here in just a moment, but I wanted to build out a scenario in order to basically simulate what we're trying to do. So I can come in here. I want to run a sequence diagram. Yeah, go ahead and overwrite the one I had. I don't have a problem with that. And it will go through and it will build out a sequence diagram that represents the steps that we talked about within our scenario. All right. Then the next thing I did, once I'm comfortable with that, is I can go and build a test case. And you learn all of this in this channel and a video that I'm going to include, right? And then it very quickly builds out a test case that I can use that represents how we're going to unit test and test this particular script. Now, to support our scenario, I went ahead and context references. I created two different elements I wanted to use separately from the first class element that we showed you just a moment ago. So if we go over to, in this design, we just talked about bringing a class element where we declare our attributes. We wrote some requirements for this, and then we did some simulation. To support the simulation, I created two elements that I can use in the context of that simulation, those scenarios, right? I used an implementation, which you can find right here, implementation class right here, and I used a utility element, and you can see that one right here, utility. And I just built these so that I could use them during my design, and so that's all I need them for. We brought in our data tables because we wanted that as an example for a couple of reasons. Number one is to understand the data we're going to be using. And in this script, we're going to use the object ID as our key value. Now, in the real script, we basically use the app ID, and we'll talk about that in later videos. You can either use the, if I just go ahead and open up an example, you can use the alias field for your app ID. And then, of course, the name is the primary name that you're showing, or you can use tag values, and I prefer to use tag values. All right. So in tag values, if I open this up and I go to tags for tag values, or you can certainly use that. You can see right here, I have a tag value, and the ID for the application is 1. You know, if you've got 1,000 or thousands of applications, it's going to be a much longer number. All right. So anyways, we've got the data table in here. We brought in our example. This is what, when we're done, we want it to look like. Now in this episode, it's not going to have tag values, but it's going to have the basic data that we're looking for to reuse, I should say, in any target project. All right. And again, TObjects property, cover that in another episode in the extension of this script to bring in more data. So we're back over in our development environment, and we declared our attributes that we're going to use in this script, right? So this is pretty much what we need. We will certainly bring in more as we extend this, all right? We also declared our connection and our record set variables or variants, and so we're ready to go on to the next step. So in step 3, essentially what I'm doing now after I've declared this is that I want to build out the user interface, all right? So this simply is the output screen in Sparx, and I'll show you that in just a moment. And it brings up a input box, dialog box, and asks the user to input the ID, and if it's more than one, separate it with a semicolon. So we're given some instructions when we go to run this. So we're going to unit test this. We're going to right click here, specialize scripts, and we're going to run our script here. And it brought up a dialog box working as expected, simply tells the user to enter app ID, and they can go ahead and do that. And so if they have more than one, you know, they would separate that with a semicolon. You know, space is needed, but you can go through here and add more than one. We'll go ahead and cancel, make sure everything closes properly. Well, I don't want to run the script right now. I'm going to cancel out because I need to go out and get a list of the IDs that I want to bring in. And in step 4, over in our coding environment, we now start doing our coding. All right, so we have our input. Here we're going to collect it, and then we're going to build out some code that basically looks at that list. Here's our app ID list. It could have one item in it or more, separated by a semicolon, as we state right here. And we're going to start parsing through. So we're going to fetch the data from the SQL database. And this is very simple. We're just going out for the object ID, the name, the alias, and the note, right? From the TObject table, where the object ID equals the input variable that we provided, right? So then what we do when we get that return value, here we're basically executing the function to build the record set. And then we're going to parse through the record set and assign our input variables to different names. We're using camel here. So object ID is for Sparx, as lowercase o object ID is for our script. Same thing for the other code elements. All right. Then what we're going to do is we're going to start creating our new class element, right? So here's E. If you remember when we set our variables, here is E. And what we're saying, and what is E again? E is the element, and we're not using tags in this, but we have it in there. Elements is the collection. All right. So here E, variable alias, gets assigned the results here. All right. So we built our element, we update here the Sparx database here, we refresh the package elements that we're going to work with, and we print an output statement down here so the user can see what's been accomplished, where we're just stating, hey, we just added an element, this is the name of the element, as you saw earlier, to package, and then it gives right here, right? And so this is a human readable statement in the end. Then we take record set that we have, and we move next, and we start looping through any other elements that are there. So we're using the if, while, when, and then we end the if statement if there's nothing else, and then we end the next if statement. We don't run any more SQL, and then we work on the next while as we've gone through the list, when closes, and then end if closes our function. Now for documentation purposes only, what I do, and we're going to select our design element here, and let me just bring property window up over here. I can minimize these. We go into project, you have a file name, and here you can go to your repository where your code is. And here's step 1 through 4 code and finished results, just calling it test. And we're going to put a link to this file from this element so that when I go ahead and just close properties, I can always get back to it. If I hit function key 12, I'm actually looking at the real code that we just developed. All right. I haven't copied this code over to the script yet. I've just brought in the code that we can go ahead and reuse. So I take the code from my development environment, I open up my script, and I simply copy and paste all the working code in here. And let's go ahead and do a test run. So in the code here, it says that we need to designate the repository, the package that we're going to be working with. So we're in our test namespace here. Just going to go ahead and bring up the blank diagram. And what we're going to do is right click anywhere on the diagram or the package itself. We see specialized come up, and then scripts, and then here's our test script. All right. So when I select that, it basically brings up this input dialog box where I put in an object ID from the Sparx table that represents the test element that we want to bring in. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And you can see over in the system output, it accomplished the task that we wanted it to do, right? So now here is the element that we just brought in. Let's bring this element into our diagram as a link here. And here it is. I can double click it. And yep, I got all of the data I wanted. I got the alias. I got the intelligence in here. I didn't get any tag values, but this is all the data that we wanted to bring in, and we accomplished our mission. Let's bring in our example of the same element out of the Sparx repository. We're bringing it in as a link. Now notice that when this came in, there wasn't a conflict. And it's very important to understand that when you're importing data like this, that the GUID, the global unique ID, let me bring back up my properties here. I'm just going to go back to my common layout, and I'm going to go to properties here, And let me drag and drop the properties window again right over here. You can see the global unique ID for this element is this number here, ending with 83. And if we look at the element that we brought in, it has a different global unique ID, all right? So it strips the GUID, creating a brand new element, and I can do this several times. I could bring in the same element into my project without getting any conflicts. Why? That's because each one of them has its own unique ID, GUID, global unique ID. All right, let's test bringing in multiple IDs. So first I needed to discover the ID. So back over in our asset repository, I brought up search scripts, and I have a script that just parses the T-object table. This is just for demonstration. I use brackets, non-brackets, just to demonstrate how it works. I am searching the entire T-object table in the asset repository, and I am filtering by class. So I'm looking at all the class elements that are in there. So we use the first one, 60, which is the object ID. Let's bring in 61 and 63. All right, we're back over in our test environment. We're in our test package. We've got our testing diagram up. And what we're going to do is right click on the package. You could certainly right click on the diagram as long as you're within the namespace. And we're going to add the other two. So it was 61 and 63. Let me cancel, test that, make sure that's working. And let me bring system output up here, right? And I started it and it started writing. Let me clear that. And let's do it again. So we're on the diagram in the browser, we're right clicking, we're going to run the script, and we get our input dialog box. For me, it's popping up in my other window. And we're going to bring in 61 separated with a semicolon and 63. All right, we're going to hit OK. So it's going out, giving us a message, hey, we added cloud data and we added Service Exchange. So we're done. Let's look over here to the browser, cloud data. Let's drag and drop this one in as a link. And Service Exchange, let's drag this one in as a link. There we go. Let's get system output out of the way here. And let's just go to switch views and let's use list view. Yep, go ahead and save. Thank you very much. And there we go. Here's the elements that we have in our diagram. And we can certainly start designing and building on everything that you've learned in this channel. All right, we're going to wrap up. And we just completed moving data from our asset repository, which is a separate SQL instance, into our target new project. And so I hope this video was helpful. I think I have it under 30 minutes. This takes a lot longer usually, but let me know down below if you have any questions or concerns. Probably going to be doing a lot of pausing in the video if you want to reuse any of the code approaches that we did here. If you're already coding in VB script or in JavaScript, this is natural to you. So enjoy automation. Just be careful, follow best practices, and you'll be good. So until that next episode, happy modeling.